and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today we welcome back on the show Amy Vertrees. She's a general surgeon. Her Kevin MD article is titled A Call to Stop Overworking. Amy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dr. Poe. I really appreciate you having me back. I'm a huge fan of your mission of letting all these stories that we see every day be shared, and so we can kind of all learn from each other.
Perfect. And thank you so much for continuing to come on. I think this is our third episode together. And if you want to read more or hear more from Amy, just search back to her prior episodes. Amy, so we're going to go right into your latest Kevin MD article. It's titled A Call to Stop Overworking. And that is sure to resonate with a lot of physicians. So walk my audience through that article and tell us why you decided to write it.
Great. Yeah, it's so interesting. I've been a coach for 2 years. And the one thing that's been consistent is everyone is just burned out and overwhelmed and not exactly sure, what happened, where to start, where to stop, actually, and really tracing it back to why everyone is overworking. For one thing, we feel like we just have to. There's, especially in these strange times of COVID, there's a lot of short staffings. And so there's certainly the pandemic issue, but I think there's also this like general culture of overworking, especially with surgeons. And through my training, we were always taught to own the patient, that you were weak if you weren't following everything. You had to know everything about the folks. And the handoffs were something that we just didn't do as much. Now, we transitioned then to the 80-hour work week, which was a challenge in itself. I think our handoffs got a little bit better. There's still issues, obviously, that came up. But I think in that generation, we got a little bit better about handing off and letting go of someone. But that creates, I think, other issues too. So now we are able to hand off, but then there's guilt with it too. Maybe I shouldn't. What are they going to think of me if I hand this person off? And so there's a culture of never being able to let go because we think that it means something about us. And we also think that the patients need that from us. They think that we have to be there all the time, that our presence is necessary. Otherwise, they won't think that we care, that we feel responsible. And it's all these thought errors over time that have led us to this culture where we're just not looking at it in a perspective that's a little bit different. And I think the millennials have, I think, a little bit better perspective of some freedom of this, but there's still that underlying idea of you're lazy if you don't do all the work. And you're irresponsible if you don't manage everything. If you're going to help someone, you're going to be dumping on them. All these things are in the back of our mind, and maybe not even consciously. But I'm even discovering this too with people that work mid-career who are working on something and they're saying, maybe I want to do something outside of surgery. So they're finding some of these things. I'm working with someone who's working in an ergonometrics company. And she's like, I feel like I'm doing it wrong because it's fun. And this idea that work has to be hard and it has to be overwhelming and it has to be just a general hustle culture is something that seems to be just pervasive in our culture.
So through your coaching practice or even through your experiences as a surgeon, give us a story or an example that really illustrates that culture of overwork.
Oh, I think a lot of it is the idea of going on vacation and stressing about it too. We all need to go. And especially if you have a complex patient, this could be a surgical patient, but you can see any medical patient too. When you have this relationships with someone, you operate on them. And especially if there's a complication or it doesn't go as well, or just the underlying medical problems are overwhelming, of course, it happens like an hour before you're supposed to go. And so, well, now, like, should I go? My partner's going to think I'm dumping on him. All the thoughts that come up that lead to a ton of stress. And when I work with folks, we look at that and say, like, look at it from your colleague's perspective. How do you feel when something comes up last minute? Well, of course I would help them. Of course I would want them to go on vacation. It's important. So we're very good at looking at other people's perspective and not good at looking at ours. And then, so it's usually the partner worry, but then there's also the patient worry. And that's actually really helpful in taking time off, but also complications too, is when we ask ourselves, what do the patients really want from us? And we think that we should be at the bedside doing everything for them, but really what they want to know that they're taken care of. They want to know what's going on, and they want to know that we care. And that actually does not have to be in physical proximity. And when I work with folks and we consider those two things and say, the first is like, what is your concern? What is your concern, or what do you think their concern is? And how could you address it, especially ahead of time? Like, if you're worried that your partner's going to think you're dumping on them, then you call them and say, this came up and I really need to go. I don't want you to think that I'm dumping on you. What are your thoughts? And we will almost always get reassured of saying, oh, no, don't worry about it. I've got it. We worry far more than we should. And for the patients too, is a lot of times if we're worried what they're going to think of us, we may avoid it. We may, just kind of go and let someone come in and, try to avoid that interaction, that what we think is going to be uncomfortable, saying, look, I'm not going to be here tomorrow. But I think that if we are certain that it's okay, then we can convey that as well, and also remembering what they want. So if you're going out of town, to say to a patient, everything went fine. Here's the current situation that we have. I just want you to know I'm going out of town. This is always planned, but I have complete faith in my partner. And you transfer your trust onto the partner. And that is going to be fair for your partner. It's going to be fair for your patient. And really working with the underlying current of what they really want, which is just to be taken care of and know what's going on.
So to travel the path to become an attending, as you know, it's a very rigorous path. You have to do rigorous pre-medical training, medical school, residency, fellowship. And I think that sometimes self-selects people who are more prone to overwork. Now, from your experience in coaching, how difficult is it for your clients to really let go of that mentality?
I'm talking from personal experience, especially too. Like when you overwork, I mentioned this in the Growth Days articles, like we let go of a lot of things that we don't want to do. We may not want to socialize with other people, or we may not want to do, some of the other daily activities or housework. And so work sometimes is a bit of an escape for us too. So one is we think that we have to do it. And then other things, it allows us to do things that we don't want to do typically, but it just becomes a bit of a habit. And we get this feeling that we're going to be lazy if we don't do something. So there's certainly a lot of incentives for working, is to avoid criticism, but also to avoid other things that we don't want to do. And I know when I have had days off, sometimes those are really stressful. If I have not planned ahead, I mean, like if you're so used to going and you pause and stop for a minute, like all the negative chatter that happens in our mind about what we should be doing, because especially if you're high achieving by nature and you have a ton of things going on, you likely have a lot of things that are unfinished. And so these little vacuums of space can be ways for us to worry about all those things that we're not doing.
So let's talk about a path forward. So if I'm a physician who is more prone to overwork, difficulty letting go, difficulty handing patients off, what are some paths forward? What are some solutions that you can offer?
I think a great thing is to practice with some days off just in general. And, like during the week, that Growth Days article I wrote back in February 2021, and which is just a practice of saying, I'm going to take this day off just for me to catch up. So catching up is one thing, and giving yourself some space, because a lot of times we're not giving our space to plan ahead and do these things. And so creating systems that allow us to be more efficient in work. And the next part is just to understand, like, what do we really want and why aren't we doing it? If I really want to go on vacation and I really hate that I feel terrible about it, is asking myself why? What are my concerns? And really sitting down and asking what my concerns are. And working with a coach too, because a lot of times we don't even know what our thoughts are that are holding us back. And, I've had several light bulb moments recently with some folks I've been working with where I say, well, I can't do this. It's not hard. And like, so work has to be hard. Like I told someone that my goal in life right now is to never work anymore. I'm not going to work anymore, meaning that I'm going to enjoy everything that I do, and recognizing the fact that it doesn't have to be hard to be worthy. And that's something I think our culture has really, we don't even realize how ingrained it is.
How hard is it to change that culture? Because I think that a lot of medical culture still embraces overwork. And when people schedule growth days or set boundaries, there's a little bit pushback from the medical establishment. So just from the clients that you coach, do you feel like there's pushback when they implement some of the suggestions that you articulate?
Yeah, and I think vast majority of the discomfort is internal, but there's certainly going to be people who said like, I had to overwork. Why can't you overwork?
Hmm.
And forming boundaries is just uncomfortable, but I think if we communicate why, then it's not so difficult. Like we said, like I'm leaving vacation and you're covering, that is going to lead to some unspoken things or some assumptions. And I think if you consider the other person and explain that, I think the most important way to change the culture is that we give permission to each other. Because if I say, I really appreciate you covering for the vacation, and I'm looking forward to covering for you too, because I know,
Hmm.
I'm sure there'll be a time when you're going to worry, and I don't want you to worry. And it's giving permission to ourselves, but I think that we need to start communicating. Like we need to be telling everyone ahead of time that they could do that and giving permission, because we don't even realize that that's what we're looking for, is permission to do it.
So when you say giving permission, how long does that process take? Because a lot of physicians, they still have that ingrained in memory, like you said before, that we have to care for patients 24/7. We have to be available 24/7. How long is that transition to this new mindset? Is it something that takes a course of months, years? Like from your experience, how long does it take to kind of make that subtle shift?
I would take imagine a couple of months as you learn your internal dialogue. And someone who's been coaching for a while or working for it is familiar with listening to the thoughts that come up, probably will catch on a little bit quicker. A lot of people who have never even thought this idea that our thoughts lead to an emotion and our emotion leads to an action, our actions give us the results. We don't even think that we're being driven by these internal dialogues. And so I think it takes a couple of months to start tuning in to some of these negative chatter, because we don't realize that's what's driving us. And so that it depends on where you are at in that mindset, that journey. And the other aspect is, I think everyone wants to help. And when you do communicate, it's a great idea. But so many times I've seen like, oh, you really need to take some time off. But before you go, if you can make sure to call all these people and follow up with all these results.
Hmm.
And so in some ways, we're like, I know I need a break, but I know I can't take it right now. And there was a period of time of about 2 weeks where I was completely overwhelmed, and call happens. Like some calls are easy and some you just have a terrible, awful stretch. And in that particular time, if you don't have a backup, if you don't have anyone to give that to, some things have to give, and getting better about asking people for stuff. And if you find yourself really, I called it crispy around the edges, is to really hyper focus on the task, like, because you can spin yourself into overwhelm. And so I think if you find yourself completely overwhelmed, is to really hyper focus on the task and say, all I have to do is write the orders right now. And then I could take a deep breath. And all I have to do is this. And then after the fact, if you have to just push through for a short period of time, look back and say, how can I fix this? Can I spread the call schedule out more? Can I ask to take less? And we have to deal with all that internal drama of, the scarcity of less money available. And, what if people think I'm lazy? And those things are going to come up, and someone may actually feel that way. And that boundaries and dealing with the culture is a little bit uncomfortable. But I think the more that we pause, ironically, the more that we take some time off, and I've seen this myself, I take off and I can come up with protocols that I couldn't if I'm drowning. And I've paused and I've met with my office staff and I've created checklist. And Atul Gawande had a great book called Checklist, talking
Hmm.
about the airline industry, to where like the more organized you are, then you don't have to have things drop. And I think this is where the danger comes in, is when we're in hustle culture and when we're working, then we make mistakes, which costs us more time. And also we use these as evidence to tell us how terrible we are. And once you kind of start spinning into that cycle of, I feel terrible, and now I'm making mistakes, and now you have proof that you're terrible, it's a cycle that is even worse. And this is what is hard to recover from, when you truly make mistakes based on not having any time to breathe.
Now, do you have a case study or a success story of a maybe before and after scenario where a physician was guilty of overwork and you made some changes and now their professional life has changed? What's the success story that you can really tell my audience to illustrate that point?
Oh, I can tell you my own.
Yeah.
I started a private practice 2 years ago, and the benefit was is I could choose all the people around me, and I was able to work with them because they report to me rather than employed, where it's a little bit frustrating. But in this particular instance, I was able to create systems in place. And I was just joking with someone yesterday. It's like I watched an entire season of Schitt's Creek finishing notes one day. I had that many to do. And I don't watch TV anymore because I actually finished my notes ahead of time. And so the amount of free time that I'm able to do by delegating tasks to other people, and the people that are there to help us really want to help us. And when we get so busy, if we don't take these little times to be kind of the CEO of our practice, then what happened to me is I was feeling like I had to do everything myself. I feel like I had to call
Mm,
all the patients. And then I would make a mistake and it would be worse. They weren't sure who they called, and they thought I called, but so they didn't. And then a patient didn't get notified. And then I mixed up two patients and I called them with the wrong result in here. And that was a real wake up call for me, because it's like I'm actually causing harm by
mm,
trying to do everything myself, and that people are here to help. And making those mistakes made me feel terrible, made me not want to do this anymore, and made me feel terrible myself, because now not only could I do the job that I really loved and was good at, but now I don't want to do anything else because I didn't trust
mm.
myself.
Sure.
And taking that journey, and I think being really present with how I felt each step of the way, like when I was overwhelmed with work and when I was really, in low, feeling that I was making mistakes, and being present with those and realizing that there's nothing wrong with me, that I had a way out. And that's how I work with folks, is I usually share my story so they can kind of see them in that, and then help them with whatever their specific underlying thoughts are. But have several success stories, but mine I know most readily because I lived it.
We're talking to Amy Vertrees. She's a general surgeon and physician coach. She wrote the Kevin MD article, A Call to Stop Overworking. Amy, what are some of your take home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
It's to pay attention to what you're listening in your mind. Why are you not doing what you want? Why are you working when you know that you don't want to? And you have permission to stop. Everyone needs you to stop. Your patients do, your family does, the people around you do, and you do. And it's okay. Nothing's going to happen. And in fact, you're going to be better off. And this life is short. So, really taking the time to get help if you need it from a coach or trusted colleague, and find ways to do less, you'll actually be much better off.
Amy, thank you so much for sharing again your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul.